Before we start using the product, it's helpful to understand what kinds of work is Parabola best suited to support so that you can start mapping these lessons to the processes you run every day. To make the mental model even clearer, we'll also talk about how Parabola complements and extends core systems in your tech stack, such as your ERP and databases. The goal coming out of this lesson is for you to feel like you can confidently recognize strong Parabola use cases in your own work. And to get started, we'll break down the core characteristics of great Parabola use cases. The best Parabola use cases usually share very similar DNA. They require pulling data from more than one system and require you to break into spreadsheets to clean, combine, and reconcile that data. You usually need to follow some kind of process document or an SOP, and usually we're working on processes that repeat, whether that is once per week or maybe every time you receive an email. And finally, these processes usually impact something that truly matters, whether that is time, accuracy, cost, revenue, or just giving you better visibility into your data. Now, a process doesn't need to check all 5 of these boxes to make for a great Parabola use case, but the more boxes a process checks, the better the use case is for Parabola. Since Parabola can automate anything you're currently doing in spreadsheets, there's really no limit to how many different use cases you can automate in Parabola. That being said, from working with dozens of different logistics companies, including 3PLs and freight forwarders, we see most use cases fall into one of 4 general buckets. Those include data ingestion and structuring, reconciliation and auditing, monitoring and alerting, and finally, cost and performance analysis. Let's break down each one and call out some specific examples. Data ingestion and structuring is all about taking messy inputs and making them clean and usable for downstream systems and processes. We see a lot of teams receiving really messy PDFs where maybe they need to extract line items and massage that data to ultimately get it into a usable format. We see common use cases around digitizing invoices and customs docs, as well as things like extracting information with AI from the body of an email. Reconciliation and auditing is all about comparing 2 or more datasets and figuring out if there are any discrepancies, duplicates, or missing values. We see this commonly with shipment reconciliations as well as invoice audits, both 3PL as well as freight and parcel invoices. Often related to reconciliation use cases are monitoring and alerting style use cases, where we're notifying you in the places that you already live day to day, such as email, Slack, and Teams, as soon as human action is required. These types of use cases are super useful for things like track and trace, where we want notifications as soon as a milestone is missed, or maybe last free day alerting so that you can make sure containers are moving on time and you're reducing penalties. Finally, we have cost and performance analysis workflows. Think of these as your common reporting workflows where maybe today you do have some reporting set up in your ERP or TMS, but you're often exporting that data, breaking into spreadsheets, and blending in data from other sources. These types of use cases allow you to fully customize those reports and blend data from other systems for use cases like margin analysis and carrier scorecards. Those are the most common categories of use cases in a nutshell. And while it's really useful to understand those specific categories and examples, it's also helpful to understand Parabola in the broader context of the tools that you already use and rely on every single day, like internal databases, your TMS, or ERP. While Parabola flows often turn into your operational source of truth for how a process actually works, ultimately, whether it's your TMS or your ERP, your source of truth stays the same, and systems like internal databases and tools remain connected based on integrations that your tech team builds, owns, and maintains. None of that changes with Parabola, but what does change is everything that happens outside of those systems. Instead of relying on CSV exports, now you have Parabola flows that are live integrated with your tools, automating things like reconciliations, providing you with a custom reporting layer on top of all of your tools, and notifying you in real time when discrepancies and edge cases exist. If we think about harder to integrate, messier data sources like your email, instead of tech teams trying to figure out brittle connections or throwing people at the problem, now ops teams are enabled to build AI-enabled workflows that can extract and structure messy data, ultimately automating the full end-to-end process. To make it even simpler, you can think about Parabola as the layer that prepares data for downstream systems and processes, combines data across siloed sources, applies logic that maybe doesn't come out of the box in your existing tools, and monitors all of the data that you don't have time to check all day, every day. Now that you understand the core characteristics of a good use case and you've seen some examples, let's take a moment to reflect on your own world. Think about the processes that you run where you're constantly exporting CSV files, performing VLOOKUPs, cleaning data, looking for discrepancies, and building reports. The goal isn't to build your whole list of use cases right now, but rather to think about those processes that feel really in line with the best Parabola use cases, which is ultimately going to make this whole course feel that much more relevant. That's all for this lesson, so we'll end with a quick recap. Now you know that the best use cases for Parabola usually tackle repetitive spreadsheet-heavy work that often involve two or more data sources. This work can range from data prep work to audit to analysis, and ultimately, it's not replacing your systems, but rather complementing and extending your systems so that you have to do less manual, repetitive work. With this foundation in place, we are ready to jump into the product. And in the next lesson, we'll walk through the flow building framework and introduce the building challenge that we'll work on for the duration of this course.